for the evening is going to be as follows. We're going to ask the judges, that's Charles Bromser and Alan Gray, to give a general overview, of their judging and their conclusions. Frank, all of a sudden I seem to have all sorts of things happening on my screen. I don't know if that's happening to everybody or not.
That's happening to everybody. That's the first.
Can we avoid that or not?
We can avoid that.
Really? Okay. The plan then is for them to have about 10 minutes just to do an overview of their judging and their thoughts about it. Then the 10 presentations will be done. We've allowed basically 6 minutes for each of them. Now, that all sounds very precise and it won't work that way, I know, but that roughly works out as an hour. The target for the total evening is for about an hour and a half. We think that's roughly what Bottoms can put up with, and we think that will hold people's interest. The suggestion is that people who are making the presentation can use the 6 minutes and the introduction. They can either give a long introduction and then quickly go through the sheets, or they can talk to each sheet, whatever way they would prefer. How they use that time is entirely up to them. With a limitation on time, the decision's being made, and I think you'll understand why we made this. There would not be questions because it's really just become quite complicated, and who knows how long it would take. So the idea is that there are no questions. However, if anyone had a very important question, then contact can be made with the exhibitor, the displayer, and that we can close that loop for them. But I hope that won't be necessary, because the key thing for you to remember is that all of these exhibits are on the website, all 16 sheets. So they're readily available at your own time and your own leisure. So please go to our website and have a very good look. Frank has got all of the images, and the people will be talking in a particular sequence I'll go through in a moment, but he's got all of those images in that sequence. So it's not possible to do a reshuffle of things. The sequence is going to be, and other than the first two, it is quite random, so people shouldn't read anything into the particular sequencing. But first off, Ian Gregg from the UK will be talking, and we'll go on to the titles later. I'm just going through the people who will be presenting, myself following, and the reality of they're selected first because they are the silver medal winners. And I feel slightly embarrassed saying it, in my case, not with Ian's, but Ian and myself are the silver medal winners. To follow, Ian Sadler, Graham Plaw, Bill Clark, then Michael Barden. I'm presenting for Michael. Stuart Watterson in South Australia. I don't know if he's online or not, but I'm presenting for him. John Wilkins, who might also be attending online, I'm presenting for him, followed by Jim Shaw and Sean Burke to conclude the evening. So that's generally the plan of how we plan on handling it. I'm just very proud that the club's got such a diversity of entries. Periods from the 1840s to QE2, 3 from Victoria, 2 from the Commonwealth, Belgium, China, Rhodesia, Mauritius, traditional, postal history, postal stationery, and not to forget Nelson. We have quite a range for you. So with no more ado, can I hand over and ask Ian, or one of the things I should say, by the way, as you're presenting, could you just give an indication to Frank as and when you want the slide to be extended to the next slide to be image to be brought up. So Frank, over to you and Ian to talk to that if you would.
Excuse me, John, can I say something?
Well, sorry, no, not you. You shouldn't, because I've cut our judges off. So I didn't mean to do that, in error. Over to our judges, please.
John, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I have to withdraw from any comment because I have a conflict of interest as I'm judging the national competition, and some of the entries are from the Royal tonight. So Charles will be making the only comments from the judging.
Okay. Thank you for making that clear, Alan, but thank you nonetheless for your participation in our judging.
Good.
Charles,
You ready now?
Yeah.
over to you. Sorry about that.
That's okay, John. So in terms of the Royals one frame, what we have had over the past, I think we're now nearly a decade, we've moved into the one frame rules as opposed to the old rules of the Royals competitions. And so the pointing is based on a one frame ruling. And the important thing that we had to have here was the first page that we're going to see for people. It is a key element of every one frame, if not multi-frame, but the key is that your title needs to be nice and tight so that it doesn't lead to being, say, a multi-frame or a 5 or 8, or some people have titles that could make up maybe 10 to 20 frames. So the key is that the title needs to be nice and tight, and then within that page, you need to talk about what the purpose of what you're showing is, how you're going to show it, what's the scope, not only what you're going to show, but what you're leaving out. Because if you say something like, I'm doing Rhodesia, the heads, which ones are you going to do? Because you don't have time to do all of them. So you need to be very specific in terms of what you're saying, in what your scope is. And then somehow you should be telling the judges how you're going to show rarity, whether you've got a different coloured matting or a different framework, or your little stars next to your items. So you need to have a good way of showing rarity as opposed to hoping that we'll find it for you. And the other thing that's important is that you do have references and that you use that reference somewhere on your sheets as opposed to simply saying it's in a major work that is, say, 600 pages and that we need to find out where your little section might be. So you need to be very specific for a one framer. And so any of the there, if you've got questions, you could ask us.
Royal, but I'm on mute. I think I'm on mute.
No, you're not. Sean?
I will get on mute, sorry.
So if anyone's got any questions, they can always ask me later, or they can contact me via email, and I can give them a broad outline of their little exhibits if they have questions about it. So, John, we can start with Ian Gregg's Railways, if you like.
Okay, Ian, over to you. Frank, you've got the screen up, so off we go.
Okay, good morning. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Good. Anyone that just saw my picture will realise my window cleaner's just arrived. That was what was going on in the background, but you can ignore that. First of all, I'd like to say what an honour it is to actually have won the competition. It's somewhat of a surprise. For many, many years, I've wanted to enter it, but living abroad is quite difficult to get the material to you to enable that to happen. I've been a member of your society for some considerable years, and as I say, this is the first time I've actually had the opportunity to enter the competition. The subject that I chose is somewhat a subject which is very much an aside for me. I'm collect the main stamps of Victoria as the prime area, and these rather strange things, the freight stamps, I've been tucking away for probably 30 or 40 years. And I have to say that they were a complete enigma to me, because there seemed to be no logical explanation as to how they were used. Very little information actually written up about them or how they were used. And I have to say, it was only probably about 12-18 months ago that I was in contact with Dave Elsmore, who very, very kindly sent me a copy of the regulations, which is the August 31st, 1877 regulations for the use of them. And firstly, it actually became very clear as to how they were used, and also it became very clear as to the complete illogical setup of the system, and explained probably why I couldn't understand anyway. If you've read the regulations, and some of them, the rather bizarre ones I've outlined in the exhibit, they just didn't work. If you can imagine printing stamps, and the illustration on the front is the proofs of the first stamps, but you can see that they actually were intended to be made in two halves. When they were when they were printed, or the intentions of when they were printed, the top half of the stamp was intended to be gummed and the bottom one was not. Now, how you actually produce a sheet of stamps with only half the stamps horizontally being gummed and the others not being gummed, I think that illustrates just how impractical the whole system was. Also, the fact that there were surcharges, I think originally of 25% and then 33%. So if you paid 9p for your trip and it was a surcharge of 25% and the 9p was the lowest value stamp, it just didn't work. But most of which I've outlined in the pages I've shown. Frank, perhaps you'd like to move on to the second page. Thank you. I'm not going to talk frame to frame, and I apologize somewhat about the quality of these. I think if you look on your members website, the quality is a lot better, but there are some actually quite rare items here, and one of the slides, or one of the items I do have, which I don't actually show here, is a rather nice receipt, and I always use it as an example as to why getting these stamps in such good condition is difficult, and that is for sending 13 bags of Malden Island guano. And if you can imagine, if the stamps have been attached to sacks of guano, they're not going to survive in good condition, particularly if they're actually traveling on open carriages across some of your wonderful countryside. Move on to the next slide, Frank, please. Thank you. As I say, that some of these items are quite difficult and the condition, as you can see, is not wonderful, but I do challenge people to find them in good condition. Next slide, please. The proofs are particularly interesting, and I will just halt briefly on this. Unfortunately, it is no questions, but I do have a question for the Society, and that is, I would be intrigued to know where the 6p proof of that latter design on that sheet is. It's illustrated by Jeff Kello in his book, but it seems to have disappeared. And if anyone does know where it is, it would be nice to be able to record at least that it still exists, even if the person doesn't want to declare that they own it. Next slide, please. Fine. And I think this is the final one. I'm not sure, Frank, but pardon?
Yes, that's the last one.
Last one, thank you. These really are the most important. I have 5 slides because I wasn't intending to say very much, and I don't think I've used my 6 minutes by any means. But
going well, Ian.
Pardon?
You're going well.
Okay, these really are the key of the story. The rest of the ones are later issues. They were larger designs, and if you can imagine, these are quite small, these particular stamps, and if you can imagine they were on a large package like a wardrobe or something, trying to find them on an item, I'm sure, was quite difficult. The regulations indicated that it should be near the address and should be placed in the same position as would be on an envelope if you were sending an envelope. But the whole setup is bizarre, even down to the fact that if you hadn't actually got the receipt to claim the parcel, if you could describe it, then that was good enough and you can have it. It was a very strange system, but anyway, interesting, and thanks to Dave Elsmore, I've actually been able to put these into some sort of logical explanation, and thank you, and I hope you enjoy the exhibit. Questions are not allowed, so we'll pass on that. But if anyone wants to send me questions via Frank or John Shorley, I'll do my best to try and answer them.
Thank you, Ian. I certainly knew, and Mr. Kello often reports you as having probably the most comprehensive collection of Victoria that he knows of, and I don't know if that's the expression "in private hands" should be used in qualifying that. But it certainly is very comprehensive, and I didn't know it was as comprehensive as to cover the railway stamps. That was very interesting. Thank you. Now, now I've got to sing for my supper. When I started collecting Mauritius postal history, you tend to accumulate in a rather random way, and some of the things I accumulated were in the middle of the 1840s, and they had unusual halfpenny rates, and you'll see those in a moment. And I was always intrigued because the descriptions that I read as to rationalize how they came about never made sense. But so I determined that I'd try to accumulate more of them, and I would try to get some sort of systematic analysis. So to do that, you often also need to know what went before and what went afterwards. So the period of 1840 to 1850 for Mauritius postal history is the end of the period of you just took every opportunity that afforded itself for getting your mail off the island, through to the end of that decade when there was a packet service from Mauritius that went up to typically to Ceylon, to Gaul or Colombo, and then caught the P&O packet that went through the Red Sea. So by the end of the decade, it was quite a systematized process. But to look at the beginning of the decade on this first slide is really an illustration of some of the complexities on the earlier covers, a variety of aspects on the cover of rates, the English rates to the top right, a weight, 15 grams on the top left in the French system, and the eventual delivery costs for this letter, which I've selected because it's quite an attractive cover, quite nicely written, was something like 6 shillings. So it was a pretty costly delivery, and that was a combination of the English rate under the Anglo-French system and the French internal rate, selected really just to demonstrate the complexities of looking at that mail, and people like Geoffrey Lewis are the keys to understanding those rates. The next cover then, thank you, Frank, was the first of these markings that I got. And here you're going to see 2 images, which are at the back of the envelopes with a smaller version of the front below. But it's this 4p halfpenny with underneath it 1 and 1 penny halfpenny, and the total price of 1 and 6. And say the previous rationalizations hadn't made much sense. But on the top right, which you won't be able to read, is an extract that I've obtained from the Mauritius Gazette going into the rates. And unusually, it quoted the rates in Mauritius in annas. Now, Mauritius and India were highly integrated for a whole number of reasons, but there are an awful lot of people from India who've ended up in Mauritius. And it's a question really of the conversion of annas, and 3 annas is 4p halfpenny, and 9 annas is 1 shilling and a penny halfpenny. And the 3 annas was the inward ship rate. The East India Company was at its strength, and so therefore, even if a letter transited through India, they charged the inward ship letter rate. And the 1 and 1 shilling and a penny halfpenny, a mouthful, was the Red Sea rate. It later dropped down to a shilling or 8 annas. So I managed to rationalize that one. If we go to the next slide, there's a slightly smaller format of that, with the shilling, which is now the Red Sea rate, and then the 8p is a special rate that's involved in going through Ceylon. So there's a total of that I own of these of 8 of them. There are, of each of the marks, there are either 10 or 11 of them known, and I've gone through a systematic analysis of how they were derived. So I found that quite a fun exercise, and it's been quite useful. The last slide then, thank you, Frank. This is really the very first date of the marking of the packet letter in that violent red to the bottom left, and the foreign letter to the top right. These are first day markings of both of those marks. Not actually all that uncommon in the case of the packet letter. The foreign letter only lasted for about a year. And the reality was that mail from India and Mauritius going to France had to pay the Red Sea rate in advance. If you were going to England, you could not pay the Red Sea rate. It had to be paid in England. The rationale for this, I don't particularly know, but the foreign letter there was to indicate that had to be paid in Mauritius. So really an interesting decade in Mauritius postal history, from a very grab every opportunity to quite a systematized approach. And that really covers all that I would like to present. So I think we've got Ian Sadler coming up next. So Ian, over to you.
Well, can people hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I'm talking about early China, starting in 1878 when it was still an empire, and moving to 1923, by which time it had become a republic. I've been interested in China for a long time, and this is some material which is not too easy to obtain unless you've got bottomless pockets. This first slide, the top row shows the first stamps of China, the large soaring dragons, typographed by the Customs Postal Service in 1878 and denominated in candarines. These stamps were copied from those of the Shanghai Treaty Port, which is shown on the next row, and were widely forged, and the two on the right are forgeries. Now, these large dragons were reissued in 1883 on thicker paper, and that's the third line down. If we then move to the bottom two rows, they show the small dragons issues of 1885 to 1888. The challenge with all these stamps is to sort out the forgeries, the Chinese being very helpful people. If you want one, they'll get you one. Move to the next sheet, please, Frank. Now, this next sheet moves on to 1897, when National Postal Service took over from the Customs Postal Service, and it's still in the Qing dynasty. The currency was changed to 100 cents equals $1 silver. Existing stamps were surcharged, as you can see, all the stamps on this page. The top row is the small dragon stamps surcharged, and then the second row is the Empress Dowager issue. That is an important issue, but I've only got 4 sheets, so I had to choose. If we then move down to the third and fourth lines, changes were made to the font and the layout in 1897. Go on to the third page, please, Frank. Now, this third page moves to some picture postcards I've got. I don't have any covers for this period. If I had a lazy $5,000 to $15,000 lying around, I could certainly have some, but I do have these rather nice picture postcards. The top one is from Peking. It left Peking in December 1901 and traveled via Shanghai to arrive in Venice 3 months later. Quite different from our current situation with people watching this from all over the world. The photo shows a boulevard in Tianjin, or Tianjin, if you want the modern name. The lower picture postcard left Amoy, which is a city on the coast, in May 1908, and traveled to Pennsylvania in USA. The photo shows a rocking stone in Amoy. We could go over to the fourth page, please. I had a terrible job deciding what I would show you and what I wouldn't out of my 16 pages, but this last sheet is now moving into the Republic. Yuan Shikai, the warlord, and Dr. Sun Yat-sen have managed to depose the Emperor Huangzong, or you may know him as Pu Yai, and we're now a republic, and the Qing dynasty has passed. Again, because it's very soon after the republic, the previous stamps are being overprinted in different fonts in 1912. The top row shows overprints made in Shanghai very early in 1912. The next 3 rows is the main set, which is a Waterloo in London overprint issued in June, and it's complete except for the two largest values. If anyone's got them kicking around, I'd be very happy to acquire them. The picture postcard below left Peking or Beijing in December 1911 for Belfast in Ireland. It played the correct rate of 4 cents, and the photo on the reverse shows the gate into the Forbidden City in Peking. I've enjoyed putting this one framer together. It probably doesn't represent the best that money could buy, but I enjoy very much showing these stamps. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And by the way, just as an overview comment, we're going well for time. Everyone's doing a very good job. So, and I'm quite sure Bill Clark, who is to follow, will be consistent. No, I beg your pardon, Graham Plore. I mucked up again. Graham, if you would be so good.
Not a problem, John, and thanks very much. My collection of covers for this display stems from a boyhood interest in King George V stamps. And I've collected them all my life, and I've got hundreds of incoming and outgoing Australian mail and around the world, Commonwealth covers as well. But that's where this collection stemmed from. Now, just collecting 16 out of them was hard enough, but then you go and ask me to do 4, and good heavens, I didn't know what to do. So I've put 4 up, and I find that covers and postal history tell a tremendous story, because even though the contents inside are missing, the envelope just can tell us so much. This first one, a German one coming out in May of 1940 to Australia, led me to go up to the Darnagilly, to the homestead, and have a look at the building today, which has serviced all sorts of purposes. But during the war, it was a location where they could round up all of the German and Italian around Australia and herd them all together into camps in Victoria and New South Wales. Excuse me. Now, it was German officers and their batmen that initially were housed at this facility in Tatura. And there were, in fact, 6 different camps in the area. So there were 50 German POWs detained there initially, but it grew to 2,000 during the war. And this covers just one example that was sent, obviously, as a letter from home to one of those initial group that appeared there. Now, the interesting thing is that it's quite rare, because exactly at those early years, the government rule was that you do not leave German stamps on envelopes, because they were capable of having instructions on the reverse of the stamp. And so they were actually removed. So this one hasn't been touched at all. It's been obviously censored, but the stamps are still in place. And I think that's one of the nicer covers that I've got in the group. Next, Frank. Then the next one I chose was from Egypt to Victor Harbour in South Australia in February of 41. Excuse me. And it was meant to Mersa Mattar in Egypt, or from Mersa Mattar in Egypt. And it was timed as part of the Western Desert Campaign, about a month following the siege of Tobruk. It's a very early example with an Australia Post CDS that travelled across. And it went with the initial group that went to Egypt at the time. So next, Frank. Now, this cover had me quite intrigued. It's one from America to Footscray, and it must have contained something of note, because Sergeant George Peacock was lost over China on December the 7th, 1944, on a return flight from a mission. And he gained the Air Medal and the Purple Heart after his death. And this cover was written and obviously held in the US and then ultimately sent to Australia on the 20th of December of 1944 by the US Army. And it's possibly at the request of Peacock if he hadn't returned, I guess. Now, the address appears to be a loved one in Footscray. I haven't been able to determine anything about that locally. I keep getting nowhere. But his home address was in Kalamazoo in the US. But it's not only a nice looking cover, but it's interesting that the censor mark in the US was actually a strip just like a bit of sellotape across the edging of the cover. It wasn't a particularly prepared, I thought the Americans did a better job at things, but it's quite a rough old censorship arrangement, but the rest of the cover is quite a delight to me. And finally, Frank, the next one. I just put this in because I think it's quite a complex and fun stamp towards the end of the war. India to Melbourne in January of 45. And it was sent on Monday the 22nd, actually, of that year. And there was a period when there were still pockets of fierce resistance. The 26th Indian Division fought for 6 weeks in early 1945. And this is coming from that area, obviously to a bank official in Coburg, Victoria. But it's got quite a significant number of stamps of both the kings on the cover, which makes it quite intriguing. But it had registered, of course, and it has a mark which you won't see very clearly, but it's a Coburg date stamp that was listed in the Watson, Webster and Wood as type 1040 with a 4R rating. So it's quite interesting because it also has an upside down date, which isn't recorded. So that's my lot of 4 stamps out of some many hundreds that I have, and I hope you enjoyed the experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. I'm particularly fascinated by the one with the German camp, because when you look at Ian Gregg's exhibit, you'll see a sheet there, and there's an example of a German language newspaper in Melbourne in 1860. So a very long history of a large number of German people based here in Australia. And so interesting to see, and I just linked those two together. Okay, over to Bill Clark. Thank you, Bill.
Hello, everyone. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, Bill, that's fine.
Good. Thank you. Yes, my one, I really did it for the sheer fun of doing it. I just thought it would be interesting to look at the problems that they ran into with the sixpenny beaded oval. So on this page, you can see they started off with printing them orange, which was a great idea, except there was mercuric salts in the ink to make the orange shade, and it reacted with the copper plating on the lead electrodes. And after the first print run of only 60,000 stamps, they had to do a major clean project to it. And so they had to stop, and they decided that, well, maybe orange isn't the right shade. So we'll go to the next page now. And so they decided that they should be black, but it took a long time to clean all the electrodes. Fortunately, they didn't have to take them out of the form. They were able to clean them in the form. But while they were doing that, there was still a demand for the sixpenny stamps. So what they did was they pulled out the wood box for the sixpence and printed them in black, because black was the new colour. And so you get a very interesting variant there. And they only printed, what was it, 150,000 of those, which is quite a small print run, really. but it's just interesting how it all fits in. And we'll go to the next screen. Thanks, Frank. Then they finally got the electrodes all cleaned up and were able to start printing. And off they went, they printed, and they were able to print 708,000 of the beaded ovals. And then somebody said, but it's an ugly stamp, it's too hard to read, we've got to do something. So they decided that they would change the design, keep the image in the centre, but change the rest of it. And so now here, what I've got is the largest unused strips from that era of the 6-penny black beaded oval. And then on the next page, they kept the image in the centre, but changed it, and it became the adapted design. And but initially they cut very carefully around the image and fitted it in beautifully to the frame. But after a while they said, this is taking too long. We'll just fit them in roughly, and there can be a bit of a white area around the edge. And so that's why there's two types of the die 1 and the die 2 in the adapted design. And just along with my concept of having a bit of fun with this, these are 2 Riverina covers, which you probably all know anyway. If you're in the Riverina, instead of sending your letter to Sydney to meet the boat, and then the ship sails down to Melbourne and then across to the UK, you could use a 6-penny New South Wales stamp and a 6-penny Victoria stamp and send it via Melbourne. And so instead of going to Sydney, it goes overland to Melbourne, and it saved quite a bit of time on the trip. And for some strange reason, I am just fascinated by Riverina covers, and I couldn't resist putting those 2 in there. So, but I hope everybody enjoys my little display as much as I enjoyed putting it together. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Bill. Now, I will now present on behalf of Michael. Michael has given me some very clear advice as to what he would like doing, and gives me great pleasure to present on his behalf. The title, as you see, is Belgium 1948 Propaganda Stamps. Now, the introduction sheet shows that there were actually were 2 productions in the year 1948. In February, 1 set of values, and then in December, another set of values. Now, what happened, of course, was that the postal rates changed later in the year. So they took the designs that they'd put out in February, changed the colours and the values for pretty well all of them. Yes, so in fact, that's true for all of them. And produced 2 very attractive set of pictorial stamps. And they were really part of, after the war in Belgium, people turning their mind to industry and trying to drive the historical growth that they hoped Belgium would have. Now, Michael calls it propaganda stamps, but frankly, I think he undersells himself, because the key aspect of these is the use of the stamps on items of postal history. And Michael has a phenomenal ability to get them to a range of locations. Now, in the display, I think there are only 2 to the US, but a very large range of countries were involved in the covers that he shows in the total display. And I think that's wonderful, because it gives him an opportunity to show the use of the various stamps in varying ways. So I think that the covers, maybe they're just to illustrate the use of the stamps, but I think they show an awful lot more than that. The first of them there at the top is the December issue of the lady. She's working silk, I think it is, and she's sitting there working away. That was 175 francs, whereas in the earlier February it was a lower value and a different colour. So those two covers, both of the December issue, and the first to US, and then one to Switzerland. So we go to the next slide, then. Thank you. And I rather enjoyed this one, these, because they are very, very attractive. And the second one down is going into the Russian zone, and it's got a censor mark going with it. So I think that's an interesting example. The 4 franc, that's the December issue, and the 2 franc 50 is also the December issue. So both of those covers I've got the December version of it, but 2 very interesting covers. I think particularly the second one with the censor mark because of going into the Russian zone. Okay, so the next next ones. The top, both of them are the February issue. The top cover is February 1949, but the stamps were issued in February 48. Interesting, very interesting combination, because I don't know the history, and it's a pity Michael, an Antarctic expedition related to Belgium is one of the stamps, so that makes it a very attractive cover. The lower cover actually was cancelled on the 15th of December 1948, which happens to be the very date that the rate changed and the new stamps were issued. However, it is actually the February issue that's actually on that cover. But these 2 covers have mixed frankings of the particular set that Michael is showing, along with other values. And then the very last slide, thank you. 2 examples of the high value stamp, and both the February and the December issues on 2 very interesting covers, USA and Argentina. I found the range of destinations that Michael gets and how that shows the usages of the varying values extremely interesting. And needless to say, and it goes without, so it shouldn't have to go, need to be said, he gets the rates right every time, and his research has been phenomenal in that area. So Michael, thank you very much for submitting that material, and I hope you enjoyed gathering it together, and it's wonderful that you could participate. So thank you very much.
Thanks for showing them for me, John.
Sorry, was that Michael? I missed that.
Yeah, I said thank you for showing them for me.
That's all right, Michael. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, you've got to. Sorry, I'm not knowing whether is that Michael talking then or. Next one, then I go on to Stuart Watterson. So if we could go on to the next slides. Queen Elizabeth pre-decimal Australian booklets. Now, booklets is a subject about which I know absolutely nothing. However, going through this exhibit this afternoon, I did learn some of the issues that confront a booklet collector. The question of the stitching, whether it's pink or red, whether they are stapled or stitched, whether they are interleaved, and you'll see examples, the central example has a waxed interleaf, and this often went to the more humid areas to make sure the sheets didn't stick. There were various editions printed on each of them, and quite often the editions changed every quarter. And then there's the question of the adverts that goes on them, and they change very regularly as well. So Stuart Watterson, who's from South Australia, I'm very glad that he participates from interstate. I don't know whether he's actually viewing this evening or not, but I would like to thank him for inputting to the competition. So the first slide, first image, I find quite fascinating. It's some of the very early sets, the fourpenny set. The first of these, there was a threepenny halfpenny booklet, but the fourpenny was the next one. But it still uses the expression there, and the arrows at the top there point to it, the reference to the British Empire. So in 1957 in Australia, we were part of the empire. We moved on from there afterwards. And the question of the stitching is referred to there at the bottom, as I mentioned. But interesting set of instructions at the top there, and it's all stressing what is the rate to the USA, which doesn't happen to tie in with the value that's in the booklet. They were the empire rate stamps in the booklet. The next slide then, thank you. I picked this really mainly because Stuart asked us to pick for him. I just liked it for the adverts. The TAA, the Ansett A&A, and the Commonwealth Savings Bank. So I found them, these 1960 booklets, very interesting because of that, and the names of the aircraft that are involved, the Electra Mark IIs and the Viscount IIs and the Super Viscounts, and take you back to flying in the 50s, in the 60s. Interesting times, but the advertising became important. And the fact that they reissued the booklets quarterly with a different advert, and the adverts paid for the actual binding of the booklets. Anyone who's involved in booklets probably knows this, but it's never really gone across my mind. But the value of the stamps in the booklet was exactly what you paid for. There was no addition for the convenience of the booklet, but the adverts paid for it. Okay, so we're just a note, by the way, that in that last slide, there was a stamp feature on the bottom right-hand side, a retouched cheek. The next one here, again, is really examples of the advertising that occurred. I just found, again, Commonwealth Bank in a variety of forms, and then statements about the rates of postage. So I find the ads very interesting, and as I say, they were an economical feature. Then the very last image, then, thank you, Frank. We've now moved on, by the way, from the British Empire to the British Commonwealth here, so that's good. But these are the stapled remakes. Now, sometimes the stitching came apart, or it was only partially stitched, and to be economical, they decided they would staple them. So at the bottom left-hand side, you can see the arrows pointing to where the stitching started and finished, and the staple in the center. Quite a number of them, though, there's no sign of the stitching, and that's where the staple is shown. So these are the aspects of booklet collecting, and it's been an eye-opener for me, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And I would like to say thank you to Stuart for providing it the entry. Now, the last thing for me is John Wilkins and the Bicentennial Trafalgar. This is this is extremely different, this one, but I thoroughly enjoyed it for a reason that I will now reveal. That quite amazing how Nelson has managed to sort of keep the kudos that he has over so many years. And this 1805 was the date of his death. And John was involved in the Navy League in 200 years later, producing commemorating the death of Nelson. But there was so much philatelic material which is exhibited in this 16 sheets related to Nelson and his death. And it's interesting that where a lot of it comes from. A lot of it comes in this particular sheet from the West Indies. So Bermuda, that's in the main Antigua and Barbuda. So these were areas that Nelson in his Navy days, and the whole British Navy indeed, was very active in there, and you'll see later on in the Mediterranean as well. So what John has done is draw together a whole series of very interesting images of vessels of the time, which are fascinating in and of themselves, and the mini sheets and the like that are derived in the West Indies and the Mediterranean. At the bottom, he's got the commemorative that was produced in Australia by the Navy League. The next sheet is the Bahamas, and this happens to be a country that I know a little bit about, and certainly the pirate and the Navy background in the Bahamas is and the scene of a tremendous number of wrecks because of the nature of the chain of the Bahamas. Anyway, Nelson was active in that particular area as well as St. Lucia that you see in the middle, and some very attractive mini sheets produced for both the Bahamas and St. Lucia, reflecting Nelson's history, and many of them feature sadly his death. The next sheet then, thank you. Nauru now, so that's one, Nauru, I'm not quite sure whether Nelson ever got to Nauru or not, but I'm quite sure he did to Gibraltar. He quite definitely did, because that's actually where I think his vessel after the Battle of Trafalgar was taken, or the considerably damaged vessel, and his body was taken to Gibraltar after the battle. I hope I've got that right, and then John, I'm sure, will contact me and correct me if I haven't. But the Mediterranean, a major sphere of influence and activity of the British Navy, but Nauru, I doubt. Okay, then I think we have just the very last sheet, which is really a very dramatic Gibraltar mini sheet, and I think it's one of the more interesting mini sheets that I've ever seen. But it certainly has created, Nelson and his actions have created a long history. And at the top you've got Barbados, and that's a statue of Nelson, which is in Kingston, I think, Kingstown in Barbados, and I think it's certainly was an area of his activity. John, if you're watching, thank you very much for participating. Very interesting and very different, and it adds to the sense of variety in our competition. So thank you for participating, and I hope everyone's enjoyed it on his behalf. You'll be pleased to know that's the end of my rambling on, and we got call on Jim Shaw to talk about the Victoria Halfpenny Bantam. Thank you, Jim. Is Jim demuted or?
He was there.
I turned my sound on, helps a bit, doesn't it?
Is.
Okay, guys. This is the Halfpenny Bantam issue that came out in the early 1870s, and as you can see, the range of shades was rather interesting. The design continued for a number of years, but this was the initial issue that came out, and it also was used for a number of different purposes too, and those are set out in my my front page in the exhibit. As you can see, there's a number of different papers that were used there as well. The watermark is obviously the same for that issue. If we can continue to the second page, please. On the second page here, we have the design as it was with no postage. The postage was eventually endorsed, and they had to include it in the design, but that came later. In this no postage one, as you can see, there's a number of different varieties and different watermarks that were used as well. And the interesting part of the whole issue was the fact that they also used a number of different perforators and perforation gauges. And these are rather hard. Some of them are rather difficult to get in terms of the issues. But there are also several different varieties. As you can see there, there's examples of different types of double perfs, misplaced perfs, and they're rather interesting. And of course, the shades too over the whole issue. Go to the next page, please, Frank. Well, this is rather an interesting one. This is one I acquired recently. It's a first day cover, quite a rare item. And the guy who actually issued it, Rundell, was also associated with the Royal at one stage. So he has quite a history. And he had a habit of actually going around and actually issuing covers when the designs were actually coming out on some of these early Victorian stamps. So he's quite renowned for that. As you can see, the usage on the second cover below too is rather interesting, with postage due being applied to it. And yeah, there's quite a few different, the value of this this value was actually used on quite a few top-ups for different postage rates to different destinations as well. If you go to the last page, Frank, As you can see here, this is New Zealand usage to New Zealand, and once again the top cover was deficient in postage, so it had was taxed on in New Zealand postage due. Some of you may know of my history with that. The lower cover is rather an interesting one to Dunedin as well, and this was a registered cover, and that was the correct postage rate applied there. If you go to the main designs as we've got them on the Royal website, you'll see the full 16 pages there, and I've included in my exhibit there a number of covers to different destinations. The halfpenny was used as a top-up for many of those because of the application of the different rates to different colonies around the world, and some of these obviously came down to halfpence. The design of the plate of the halfpenny was 480 images. So it was rather a large plate because it was a very, very small stamp, and it's very, very fiddly to deal with, I can tell you. But the perforators they had to develop to perforate it often were rather intriguing because they didn't just perforate by one comb. Obviously, there was line perforators involved as well. And often the line perforators had to perforate intermediate rows to eventually perforate the sheets. And they're rather interesting to show those. So I hope you go and look at the website. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much indeed. Well done. Last, but by no means least, and I've assured Sean he shouldn't take any form of exception to being last cab off the rank. Off you go, Sean.
Oh, sure.
Thank you very much indeed. If you've read Don Mosley's book on the history of Yorkshire cricket, I think the title is called "We Don't Play It for Fun." And I've been listening tonight and thinking that we do this for fun. And it's lovely to hear people talk about how much they enjoy putting together their exhibit and they enjoy sharing it. So thank you very much for that. Mine's pretty simple. For reasons that I won't bore you, I'm interested in Rhodesian philately. I'm interested in the double head. I can't afford the double head in all its extremes, but the penny double head is a rather lovely stamp. Some people have suggested it might be the greatest stamp in the British Empire. It's a big call. And I started picking them up on fiscal pieces, documents, receipts and things, because they really do hold their original colors. And that's what particularly attracted me. There were about 14 million of these printed, firstly from one plate, and then they did an Electra plate after that, and then they continued printing with both. So there are a huge number of flaws and color variations. When doing this, I started off, I thought, well, I'll collect these and display them for their colors, and then maybe for the social history around the particular document, which I've done. But then I got brave and had a couple of gins and tonic and decided I'd plate the stamps as well. So I did it from that. One of the difficulties is when people talk and judges like to know about rarity. Well, if you look at any postal history item, each item is unique. So rarity is very problematic factor. I mean, the stamp comes in per 14, 15 and 13 and a half. The 13 and a half are pretty rare. How many of these documents around are there around? I don't know. Each one is in itself, but they're becoming, I just enjoy it. And there is one of the sheets, which is not shown here, where I have a whole range of examples just to show the kaleidoscope of colors, and it is rather beautiful. This one here, this first one, and I'm just going to have to move my my thing. You can just see this first one on the opening cover just comes. It's a receipt for an insolvent estate. I've managed to plate it. And if we could go to the next page, please. Thank you. This is Landau Brothers. It's quite a spectacular floor here, this the Queen's Neck re-entry. It is a very spectacular floor. In fact, it's a pretty good thing to have. Quite a nice statement. Landau Brothers, quite interesting. And Colin Hoffman, I see, is out there in the audience. Northern Rhodesia especially, but Rhodesia was one of the few countries prior to the Second World War which opened its gates to European Jews fleeing from Europe. And the Landaus, and I'm not sure the original name came much earlier, I think they were cattle traders in Barotse land, and there were a number of them, and this is one particular Landau brother. They were merchants in both Salisbury, which is now Harare, and Bulawayo. But what's interesting about, I think it's probably the son of this Landau, is that he was a cabinet minister in Ian Smith's government, and he was a cabinet minister in Bob Mugabe's government, which must be an interesting coupling on the tote. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Just a bit of background. Could I go to the next one, please? Thanks. Haddon and Sly, well-known early dealers. This is just a statement which has been settled. Perth 13.5 stamp, which they are pretty rare, those. They're pretty hard to come by. As you can see, the plating of it is a bit exotic. Next one, please. This is interesting. This is again a statement from the Avondale Village Management Board. What's quite interesting is this is for, they obviously had their waste taken away, and the European buckets and native buckets cost the same. So they might have had different buckets, but they were certainly charged the same to take away their buckets of human waste at the end of the day. And this is from 1912. I think that's about all. I only gave you 4. I think 4 is enough. Plenty. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Dawn, I'm surprised you haven't drawn attention to the blue edition on that one that says complaints as to irregularity of service should be made at the office to the collectors. Now, I think that's a singly appropriate thing in the terms of the service that's being offered. Thank you, Sean, for that. Now, we've done very well for time. Well done, team. That's very, very, very pleasing, but I hope people have enjoyed the variety. Now, Charles, you really didn't take your 10 minutes. Have you got anything you would like to add as having seen all of the exhibits, or entirely up to you? Don't feel obliged, but if you have anything to say, please do.
Well, if we go to next year, if we got 10 this year, if we could get at least another 5 next year, it'd be great if we could go to 15. There's still lots of members who have got wonderful material, but we only rarely see them if there's a display night. But there are only a couple of display nights a year, so if they could start working on their one frame, and of course, as we know, some of these one frames have already gone on to the Victorian or the virtual Australian exhibition, and they will also be available at the APF site, so they can look at more of them.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you again for you and Alan, and I'm sure Alan will be doing a good job on the virtual APF exhibition. Now, Frank, have you anything you want to add before we go into sort of more procedural type matters again?
No, I've got nothing at all to add.
Really,
other than 31 members have joined us, which is really good. So yeah, it's most we've had so far.
I must say the Zoom has been very, very pleasing in the sense, and particularly with visitors from the US and from a variety of locations. It really is wonderful. It's opened the door, and your council is very keen that we will continue having a number of these next year, even and if things go back to normal. And more of that I'll just talk about in a moment. Now, in a normal philatelic meeting, the next thing we'd do is talk about the minutes of the previous meeting. Well, frankly, since no one has seen them, I think that might be presumptuous, and I think the better idea is not to worry about that, and we might try to catch up with minutes, Bill, if you don't mind, Mr. Secretary, when we next meet. But I don't really think we can do them any form of justice. There've been no new applications received for membership. Now there's a surprise. Now let's just talk about forthcoming events. We don't know what sort of a world, and for those of in the UK and the US, etc., forgive me in this, and indeed for those in South Australia, but our Premier is due to announce to us on Sunday what the immediate next step in our world is going to be. Now, there's much hope around all of that, but some of the latest data has not been as encouraging as it might. But the thought was really that the November meeting, it is very unlikely that we will be able to have 20 people within the same venue on that night on the 19th of November. So our plan is to have another Zoom meeting, and the presentation will be by Glenn Stafford on Nicaraguan postal stationery, the Seebeck era, 1890 to 1899. And the plan at the moment is that will be a Zoom meeting. But in the event of a huge surprise and life becoming considerably more flexible, we would review that. But I think that's not an unreasonable assumption. The decision of council already is not to have a Christmas party. The essence of Christmas parties is people getting together, and social distancing is the last thing one wants to do at a Christmas party. So that has been cancelled with much regret. But the hope is that come January, when life has become easier, says he, hopefully, that as soon as is possible, on the third Thursday, we would have a social event, rather like Christmas party. Whether we won't have all of the essence of Christmas parties, but it'll just be an attempt to get everyone back together in the building. I can tell you we need to get into the building because the cobwebs on the front door, and I was there this morning clearing the post box, are to be seen to be believed. So it's very sad, and the sooner we can get back into the building, the better. But the hope is that we can do that in January. So that really was the formalities that the plan for the evening. We've beaten the time by a considerable margin. So if there were anything that people would particularly like to raise now, would they feel free? And I just hope you've enjoyed your evening. That's the important thing.
John, I'd like to raise something. We had an application from a guy by the name of Paul Xavier. I believe that should have gone through by now.
It has gone through, isn't it?
Has it?
Yes, that went through via email.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's been long gone. Yeah. Anything else anywhere?
Can I just make a comment, please?
I don't know who that was. John, can I just raise the topic of the day meetings? Hopefully by the time we get to February, we shall be able to have a meeting. Also, within the next month, we'll probably need to prepare a syllabus for the day meetings. We last had a day meeting in March, so most of last year's topics, or a large number of them, are still available. So I'm proposing just to reschedule the people who would have been exhibiting this year into next year, but we still will need a couple more displays. So if anybody has a topic they'd like to present at one of the day meetings, if they could get in touch with me by phone or email, as soon, preferably within the next couple of weeks, so that we can do something about finalising a syllabus for next year.
Sounds like a good plan. Okay. Nothing else around the table?
Can I ask a question?
Of course you can, Ian.
Thank you. I think I'm barred from entering your competition for 3 years now by your rules, I believe. But can I encourage you to actually continue with this format, because it does seem to have had an outstanding response. I fear I sincerely hope in 3 years' time we will be back to some sort of new normal, whatever that new normal may be. But can I encourage you to do that? Because I've really enjoyed entering, and trying to get material across to Australia to enter is obviously slightly complicated for those of us who need more than a number 10 bus to get there.
Well, you interstate and overseas members can enter their exhibit if they send it through as a photocopy or scanned, and we can print them out and get them viewed at our meeting anyway. So that's in our rules. So you can enter without actually showing your actual exhibit.
Well, I have to say, as I said at the beginning of my bit, I wasn't aware of that, and perhaps that ought to be made more clear, because I don't recall seeing that in the rules when I read them before doing my entry.
I'm pretty sure it is, but I'm gonna reword that anyway. Have a look at that next year anyway, and reword that and fix it. So it's.
But your point's well taken, Ian, and it is really good, and it's great to get input from you, but particularly such interesting material.
It's good.
The rules say you have to be from Australia or New Zealand. So you need to check your rules.
Well, I agree with you entirely there, Les. If it does say that, then that's one of the things that Frank and I need to pick up for
that anyway
next year.
Yes.
I wanted to enter, and I realized I couldn't.
Well, I apologize for that.
No. Encourage them.
Yeah, exactly. That's.
If you sent us an email, Les, I would have told you just enter.
Okay. But I think the point, even if it's a face-to-face meeting, of having scanned entries has a big advantage for members who can't get to see them at the actual meeting. So, it's something that I think we should perhaps consider, not necessarily having the whole thing this way, but to having all the exhibits scanned and available online so that people can at least have a look at them and share them, seems to me to be a rather inclusive thing for members who don't live in Melbourne.
I think from now on that with our new website and with Bev.
Thank you very much.
All our annual competitions from now on are going to be put on the website.
Fantastic. I think that's great.
Yeah,
along with a series of other presentations, and that's slowly developing and increasing, because we're hoping to cover, we're not limited to any particular area, but the more diverse we can get material on our website, the happier we'll be.
Frank, can we just put in a plug for AusVIPEX? I know we've talked about it, but AusVIPEX is very close to going to, this is the Australian virtual exhibit, and the site is very, very close to being shown. It'll be up on the 1st of November, if not slightly before, for everybody to see. So again, it's the first time that Australia's done a one-framer. So I really encourage people to have a look at it and see the rest of the one-frame exhibits from Australia.
Stephanie, I'm right in believing that you got more than 60 entries?
63. 63, I think it was in the end.
68.
68, was it?
68.
Wonderful.
Yes.
But sadly, again, limited to those from Australia.
This one we did limit to Australia. Yes, this one
and
was.
New Zealand.
And New Zealand. It was a national exhibition.
Yeah. John, Jim Shaw here. Look, I was on tonight on the New Zealand website. They decided to defer and have their immediate first Zoom meeting tonight, just before ours. But that actually went down well. They had 4 speakers and went down for about an hour and a half. So yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
Can I just raise another issue? And that is, obviously an increasing number of societies are holding Zoom meetings, many of which I think are recorded. And it seems to be sensible that someone ought to start making a list of all these individual presentations, because other societies could just simply use them as a recording rather than and it would expand the actual audience to some of these presentations.
Great idea. Yeah.
By the way, Ian, you made reference to if we're in trouble in 3 years' time, but obviously you know something we don't. You're obviously going to export Boris Johnson to us.
No, thanks.
I'll pass on that.
I'm sure you'd love to pass on it. Okay, anything else before we close? Just say, wonderful to have a good turnout. I hope everyone has enjoyed it. Great variety, and I think that's great for the society that we've got that range of range. Frank, thank you for your Master of Ceremonies work there, but much appreciated. Thank you all for attending, and thank you to the judges, and thank you for those that contribute to the displays. Thank you again, and good night.
Thank you all. Good night.
Thanks, John.
Good night.
Thank you.